Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Fantasy Football Predictive Analytics. I'm Jeff Tefertiller. It's my son, Rhys. We are joined by Jeff Haseley. Jeff and I have known each other since
Long
days
time.
that we – all right, so, Jeff, I'm going to ask you a question that I think I know the answer because you and I
Okay.
came into the Fantasy Football guys the same year, 2007, right?
Yeah, that's right. '07.
We've been staffers on Football Guys since '07. Rhys, how old were you then?
I was 1 or 2.
Yeah, he hadn't
When
turned.
you came on.
He had not turned 2 yet, which is funny because time flies.
Time freaking flies. This is
Oh
exactly
my!
right.
So these are going to be brief. We're wanting to just talk about one or two straightforward topics, give some opinions, have some strong analysis. Rhys and Jeff have some fire they're going to bring. We're going to talk about the Panthers and what should we expect from Teddy Bridgewater. What will the Matt Rule, Joe Brady effect? I see the effect, people using the Joe Brady effect, but what are our expectations? Applying Kyle Allen and Ron Rivera to Teddy Bridgewater and Joe Brady seems a little flawed to me. And then all right, let's assume DJ Moore's a stud and we don't have to worry about him. Who's going to step up to number 2? Is it Robbie Anderson, who got $8 million? Or is it Curtis Samuel, who everybody thinks maybe this is the year? And lastly, not least, can Ian Thomas step up into the void created by, I would say Greg Olsen leaving, but it wasn't that. It was Greg Olsen being injured every year or being, nicked up, right?
Right.
So let's get started. So, Jeff, you're the guest. I'm going to pitch it to you. What should we expect from fantasy owners, from Teddy Bridgewater this year? You don't have to give me stats, but fantasy finish. Is he a top 20 guy, a top 12 guy, or I want him somewhere after quarterback 48?
Well, I would honestly, I see him as a top 22 quarterback right now. That's kind of like his floor. And his ceiling could go as high as we think it can go. It really can. And it all kind of hinges on Joe Brady. So I would say, realistically speaking, I think he could be a top 15 quarterback, provided that the offense flourishes, provided that maybe the defense doesn't, because I think a bad or a poor defense is going to yield more production on the offense. So there's that. There's also what we know of right now in terms of Joe Brady, what he was able to accomplish at LSU. Just looking at LSU in 2018, before Joe Brady arrived, they were the 38th ranked offense in college football in FBS. When the 2019 season finished, LSU goes 15-0. Joe Burrow throws 60 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, and Joe Brady, of course, was the man behind that, him and Steve Ensminger. But they were the number 1 ranked offense. And what's the difference? Burrow was there in 2018, right? Ensminger was there in 2018. Joe Brady's the difference. So it's going to be interesting to see what he's going to do with Carolina, especially in a year where there's a new coach, you've got new coordinators, you've got this whole system kind of in flux right now with COVID and with practices, no preseason. Wow, what's going to happen week 1 against the Las Vegas Raiders? And that's going to be the interesting telltale sign. And as far as Bridgewater is concerned, it's all based off of what he can execute in Joe Brady's offense, and of course what Joe Brady can create to cater to Bridgewater.
And I appreciate you framing it that way because I watched too many football games. My wife would say way too many, but too many where the coach does not cater the system. Like they'll sign a 3-4 D end and then switch to a 4-3, and you're just like, why?
Yeah.
But so let's frame this. Bridgewater was hyper efficient on low volume when in New Orleans. And now he goes to Carolina. And so Brady and Bridgewater have some time together in New Orleans. Rhys, what are your thoughts on Brady and Bridgewater, whether it's their time in New Orleans or whatever it is?
Bridgewater was as he said, very efficient. In fact, he had scored 0.6 fantasy points per attempt last year. And there was tons of volume in the Panthers' passing offense last year with 633 dropbacks. And I say dropbacks because not every dropback it turns into a throw. It can turn into a sack. So I really like Teddy Bridgewater, and I think his ceiling could be quarterback 11.
So what, Rhys, I'm assuming you've done the research because we've read the book, right? And so Rhys has a book by the same title, took a deep dive. What was Brady and Bridgewater when they were with the Saints in, 2018? What was the impact there?
When Brady was with the Saints, they scored over 500 points that year, which was third in the league. And
30 a game.
Yeah, that was a good season for them.
Yeah.
That season was also overshadowed by the coming out party of Patrick Mahomes. So everybody forgot about him when he stayed in state and moved down to Baton Rouge.
Gotcha. When Brady did. All right. So we all like Brady and Rule, right? Jeff, I'm putting words in your mouth. We like Brady and Rule with Teddy. And let's be honest, Teddy was the Buccaneers' second choice behind Tom Brady. And so Teddy had a market for his services. He chose to go to Carolina.
Yeah, he's got ties.
He's got ties.
And he likes the opportunity. I think he sees a future as opposed to perhaps maybe not with Tampa Bay. Plus, you throw in Joe Brady, you throw in Matt Rule, and it's just a recipe that he was looking for.
Right. And Teddy is pretty young, right? I mean, he's not an old quarterback by any means.
26, is he?
He's like 50 days older than Carson Wentz.
Which is crazy.
Okay. That's a good way to put it. I like that. Okay.
Well, especially when you think Brady's almost old enough to be his dad, right?
Yes.
Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Yes. Tom Brady, because we were talking Buccaneers.
Right. Too many Bradys. Right.
30.
Yeah. So anyway, I am optimistic with Teddy Bridgewater and Joe Brady, especially like if we're talking Teddy Bridgewater, we're not talking about him as your quarterback one in your fantasy league, right?
No.
I mean, we're talking about he's a two. He's a two, and we're arguing over, is it the floor? Is he a low-end quarterback two because of his floor? Or is he a high-end quarterback two because of his ceiling? And am I wrong, Jeff? Is that a way to frame it?
No, absolutely. And, I was looking at an article Chris Allen wrote, Teddy Bridgewater, when he Carolina. He looked at when Bridgewater took over for Drew Brees in week 2 after he hurt his thumb, that the Saints, first of all, were averaging 34.5 yards per drive. Well, actually, they averaged that per season. For the season.
Right.
And when Bridgewater came on, that yards per drive only dipped down to 34.3. So a really small difference. So what Chris pointed out in this article is that Bridgewater did well between the 20s, but he kind of struggled in the red zone where he had, just let's see if I can find it. Where is it? I'll have to find the specific stat that I'm looking for, but he struggled in the red zone, whereas that's where Joe Brady thrives.
Right.
When he was with LSU, Steve Ensminger pretty much ran the offense as the coordinator between the 20s, but then Brady came on and really kind of took the team over once they got into the red zone. And having the number one offense and Burrow being so efficient, there's a lot to say about that. So getting back to Bridgewater, how does this apply to him? If he can remain and be an efficient type of passer in the 20s and let Brady really kind of take over in the red zone, I think that's going to be a huge help. Now, are we looking at Bridgewater turning into Joe Burrow? No. I don't think we're seeing that. Burrow's, I think, a much better, deeper passer, more accurate deep. You can even say that he has more instinctive traits than Bridgewater. But still, if he can be more productive, especially in the red zone, I think Bridgewater's rank, like you said, Rhys, could be up to 11th. but that's not where he's being drafted. He's being drafted lower, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. If this is the case, then he's going to be a quarterback that's going to exceed expectations, and you're going to get a much higher return on your draft value. Taking him as the 22nd quarterback off the board and watching to see where he lands. So there's definitely opportunity. You want to have players like that on your roster. You don't want it the other way around. You definitely don't want that. And you don't want to draft someone with an ADP based on what their expectations are. So Bridgewater is someone who you can kind of draft with little risk with a lot of upside.
Right. And before we move on, Rhys, you have anything to add to the Bridgewater conversation?
Bridgewater, Joe Brady was able to turn Joe Burrow into a Heisman quarterback and the #1 overall draft pick. But a lot of people forget Dwayne Haskins was able to beat him out at Ohio State.
Yeah, true.
You could turn someone who is worse than Dwayne Haskins into the Heisman. What can he do with someone who does have a talent in Teddy Bridgewater? I'm not saying Joe Burrow doesn't. I'm just saying.
That's fair. But
would you say, though, that Bridgewater has more talent than Burrow?
No. I'm just saying he's a more refined short thrower.
But the other piece to that, Jeff, I'm going out. I'm taking a stab here, okay?
Yeah.
Burrow had more talent on that offense skill position than any team in the NFL.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he did. He sure did.
Jamar Chase, he has at least 2 first-round picks at which receiver, a first-round pick at running back. You think about that. That happens so infrequently that we have to go, huh.
Well, that might be a stretch to say everyone in the NFL, but definitely college football for sure. But as far as the players are concerned, yeah, he had whoever the heck he wanted in terms of talent. With Jamar Chase and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, there's just Justin Jefferson, not to mention having Joe Brady, run your plays. And one thing that Brady did a lot of once he got into that red zone, when he took over, we saw a lot of those bunch formations, which is what's going to confuse defenses because you don't know if that's going to be a run, and those receivers, the X, Y, and the running back maybe in certain cases bunched over. You don't know if that's going to be a run and those receivers turn to blockers, or if we're going to see more, if they play it straight up man to man, if there's going to be more like natural type of pick plays. There's so much you can do off of those, and that's where he really thrives. And I'm excited to see what he can do in terms of his offense at Carolina, especially with the weapons that he has. You throw McCaffrey in there, who we already know how good McCaffrey is. DJ Moore, who's just a solid competitor who knows the offense well. He's a good talent, of course. And then Curtis Samuel, who is almost like your Swiss Army knife, who can do pretty much everything, including running the ball. And then you've got Robbie Anderson as a potential deep threat, or just, as a potential third or fourth receiver, depending on how you look at it. Not to mention Ian Thomas, it's also there. So, he's got weapons. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen in that offense with Joe Brady.
All right. I have a loaded question for both of you, and then we'll move off of Brady Bridgewater. You all ready? All right. I'm transparent, Jeff. So loaded question is being said, loaded up front.
All right.
With no preseason, is it a help or a hindrance for the Brady Bridgewater effect? We can all guess that the negative is they're not able to practice. They haven't had rookie, OTA, regular training camp.
Mm-hmm.
Also a blessing in there that other people haven't been able to prepare for it. Because what we also need to factor into this equation is Matt Rule is a very good offensive coach.
Mm-hmm.
When he was at Temple, had PJ Walker, he had Robbie Anderson. So we'll get to this in a minute. I'm probably higher on Robbie Anderson than you are, only because of that Temple connection.
Yeah.
But
true.
Rhys, what do you think? Is it a help or a hindrance?
I think it's a hindrance on the NFL, but I think it's a help to fantasy owners because without a preseason, we don't know what Carolina is capable of. And it might let people forget about just how good Joe Brady was in LSU.
How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, it's kind of hard for me not to think of this as a hindrance because just the fact that they don't have enough time to practice, to put things into motion, to actually walk even through the plays rather than even run them, with no preseason to go up against. I mean, I'm sure they're going to have organized practices and such and scrimmages, right? They have to. In other words, what in the world are they going to do prior to week one? Is week one going to be just like, whoa, let's see what happens,
The Raiders defense.
Flags everywhere. Oh my gosh, it could be a mess. Don't necessarily want that. And plus, how are they going to determine to break down their roster, from 90 to 53? So, man, I think the more time that they have together, the better. So I would say it's a hindrance if that time is decreased.
Also, we would all agree, and I'm saying that what's the elephant in the room? We would all agree that having it on an iPad and walking through it in your front yard is not the same as spending time on those, in training camp. So let's move on to Christian McCaffrey. He's the star of the Panthers show. Can he have another 400 touches?
I hope not. As a Panthers fan, I hope not. And I think a lot of people, McCaffrey fans, are hoping not, as long as he produces the way that they're expecting, right? May not necessarily have another 1,000 season. I think we all can probably agree that that's most likely not going to happen. However, I don't want to see him. It pains me to watch sometimes when and it doesn't happen often, when McCaffrey's not on the field. It's like, what are they going to do? What are they going to run? So in one sense, I think a lot of it is McCaffrey himself. I mean, he's just a well-conditioned athlete, and it's his decision. He says, "Hey, coach, I'm fine. I'm good. I can hang. Put me in." And also, too, it depends on who they have to potentially replace him. Is that Reggie Bonifant? Is that Mike Davis? Is that some veteran signing? I mean, who knows what that's going to be? Right now, McCaffrey is the clear leader in the clubhouse, definitely, in terms of depth chart, and he's so important to the offense. Just his presence is enough to confuse defenses, the way how he's lined up and the routes that he is not only capable of running, but successfully doing. So, I mean, he's a big piece of the offense. Do I think his volume is going to decrease? Man, I sure hope a little bit that it does. But I honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it's something that's kind of similar. If I had to put a number on it, like a percentage of last year, how many touches did he have last year? 400, over 400?
429.
429. So, yeah, that's an awful lot. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that we're going to see a great reduction. Like I would be surprised if it's less than 380, even 400. I just think that he's such a big part of that offense. They're just going to continue to use him, especially Brady. And as long as he's healthy, they're going to. Why wouldn't you?
Think about this. And I'm running numbers in my head. Average team gets off 65, 70 plays a game, right? Something like that. Mm-hmm. And he touched the ball 26, 27 times a game. And so
that's a lot.
You know what I mean? And so not only that, if he's not on the field, they are one-dimensional, right? I mean, you're not going to hand it to Reggie Bonifant and say, hey, I think we're good, Defense isn't going to respect that. Rhys, what are your thoughts?
There were times when, this is back when Jonathan Stewart was on the team, I think McCaffrey's rookie year, where in fact, I remember one play in particular where McCaffrey was more of a decoy, and the ball wound up going to Stewart at a counter tray type of run, and he took it to the house because the whole defense was over on McCaffrey's side of the field, and boom, here's Stewart. Now, could they run stuff like that? Sure, absolutely. But right now, they don't have that Jonathan Stewart to be that complementary type of backer player, and they haven't had that since 2017.
So you're looking at Lamar Miller, Devontae Freeman?
I don't know. Maybe, possibly. Yeah, I mean, those are the two marquee names right now that are open in free agency. LaShawn McCoy, but he's past his prime, I believe, But that's a possibility. And there's also, like I said, Mike Davis before, who a lot of people are forgetting about. Also is in the mix, someone with South Carolina ties. So it's possible.
I know. Rhys, what do you think about McCaffrey? I'm interested to hear this.
I do not think McCaffrey's going to get his 429 touches, but I do think he's going to get a lot.
You think
Mhm.
430?
I think
431? Do I hear 432?
Yeah.
more of like 400 to 390. But
Yeah.
also going into like DJ Moore, I'm not exactly buying DJ Moore at his price because I do not want to draft the second option on a team unless it's like Mike Evans inside the top 4 rounds or so.
Well, I mean, I see your logic there, but at the same time, I mean, DJ Moore excelled so well with Kyle Allen, and he was a big piece of the offense, just like McCaffrey. Even with McCaffrey's huge season, Moore was able to do, quite a lot. And I think we're going to continue to see that. I mean, he was targeted often. In fact, only the Rams had more targets or more instances where a player was targeted 10 times or more in a game. So the passing game is going to be key, and I think Moore's still going to be a big part of that. Would I rather have Mike Evans over DJ Moore? That's a really good question. I would probably rather have Moore than Evans, just because I think there's a little bit greater potential. Even though Evans has had 6 straight 1,000-yard seasons, which is very, very difficult to ignore, I think I would still take DJ Moore and the possibility that he has 80 catches, 1,200 yards and 7 or 8 touchdowns. Could Mike Evans get that? Yes, but he's also not the number one. He's 1A or 1B in the Buccaneers offense. So, and I think it depends on who you ask. I think you probably get 50-50 on each one.
Yeah.
DJ Moore or Mike Evans.
Give me
Chris Godwin, I'll take Godwin over Moore.
Yeah. The one thing to consider as we're talking about this, just my lowly 2 cents, all right? One thing to consider is that the Panthers threw a lot of passes last year, and I expect them to be more efficient, less volume this year, which could shrink the pie for both McCaffrey and Moore in terms of upside.
Right, but would you agree, though, that this is an offensive year coming up where defense is not really going to be a huge part of the game plan, especially with crowd noise being at a very low factor?
Right. But also you have a new system, new offense. Because what rank did the Panthers have last year in total passes attempts?
They were second with 633 attempts.
Or not attempts. 633 was dropbacks, right?
Right.
But second, all I'm saying, Jeff, is that second goes to 8. So you're still in the top quarter.
Mm-hmm.
They lose enough volume. That's all I was getting at.
Okay.
But also, if you're not passing, that usually means you're running, which would increase Christian McCaffrey's value as well.
Can you guess which one of the two of us had McCaffrey on their fantasy team last year?
He did.
Yeah.
You know what, Jeff, and this is not about me, but I just wanted to say I have never, in all of my fantasy leagues ever, dynasty, redraft, anything, never had McCaffrey on any team. So I have never shared that joy, and I hate it. The year that he was a rookie, I think I had the 4th pick overall, and the 3rd pick was McCaffrey. My pick, I took Joe Mixon. And who was 1 and 2? I forget who it was.
Probably
back then.
Fournette and Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, it could be. I think you might be right. Maybe not Cook, but
Kamara.
I'll have to go back and look at. Yeah, it might. No, Kamara wasn't a top draft. He was like a 2nd round guy in terms of rookie drafts and stuff.
Who were the receivers that year, Rhys?
There was Mike Williams and Corey Davis and John Ross in the 1st round. So tons of fun there. But along with like Chris Godwin and Cooper Kupp, Kenny Galladay later on.
Yeah, I forgot who might have been before. It's the Sam Bowie before Michael Jordan, draft, but and Olajuwon. I don't know. What was I getting at? I lost my train of thought.
Sorry. I almost think it's now, like those people that would back in the day have the 2nd pick and you knew LT was going number 1. You're just like, oh man,
Oh yeah.
And so now I almost feel that way about the 2nd pick in redrafts this year, because if you like McCaffrey 1 because of his receiving upside, that's great. I don't see there being a clear cut 2. And so.
Yeah, unless you're a big Barkley guy. But that was my point, was just the fact that I've never ever had McCaffrey on any of my teams. So I just wanted to say, boo, that stinks, because now I'm jealous of you because you had McCaffrey. So anyway.
All right, so let's talk. All right, we're giving DJ Moore a pass because now we're just arguing how good of a receiver one he is, right? Mm-hmm. And so now let's look, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, and that's about all they have on the depth chart, right?
Yeah, I mean, Seth Roberts, kind of a journeyman who's been around. Does he make the team? Maybe, but we're also talking about a base formation that's going to have 3 to 4 wide receivers. So those are going to be your receivers. And McCaffrey is probably included in that.
Right.
And then you throw in Ian Thomas. Most likely it's going to be that pairing of 4 or 5 players there, including Thomas.
So let's think about this. So are you, from our conversation, I'm going to guess you're a Curtis Samuel kind of guy.
I just like his ability. I like his potential. I like his versatility, his athleticism. Robbie Anderson, to me, also. I mean, as much as I like his ability to pull in some deep passes and to have a high yards per reception, I think he's lacking maybe a little bit in terms of being an overall a well-rounded receiver. And I can see how Samuel is also someone that's going to be kind of like the new toy for the coordinator, in this case Brady, to kind of use as his gadget, his weapon, his secondary option for McCaffrey, because they both can kind of do it all. But McCaffrey is the one who gets all the publicity, but Samuel's not that far behind, and I can see him being a big part of that offense, because I mean, and Joe Brady has also said, hey, we're going to get him involved. And I forget the exact quote, but I mean, he didn't say that about a Robbie Anderson. Now, of course, Rule might have something to say about that, right? But I am more of a Samuel guy than a Robbie Anderson guy.
So I'm going to throw this out there. I'm not saying it's literal, but I could see Robbie Anderson having a close to a season that Ashley Lee did back in the day with 51 catches for 1,000 yards. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, I don't remember the high yards per carry or yards per reception. I can't talk for Lilly, but that sort of brings back memories. You're talking Denver, right? With who was he with at the time? Who was the other receiver?
Brandon Marshall was not there that point.
Yeah, it wasn't Marshall yet, right?
No. Might have been Ed McCaffrey.
Yeah, McCaffrey might have been too far back.
Yeah.
But and Rod Smith also too far back. We're going into that era in between those guys. I don't remember.
Jake Plummer, the quarterback, or something.
Anderson.
Right. But anyway, could he do that? Yes, if Bridgewater gets that deep throw working, or if they do a lot of play action and he's the guy that they turn to in that regard.
Right.
I would say there's probably less than a 50% chance of that happening. No.
Oh, I think it's like 10%. I think he has a better chance to get 1,000 yards than he does 20 yards of reception. I mean, there's been a lot of fast guys that have never been able to do that. And so Rhys, what are your thoughts about Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel? Curtis Samuel, Matt Harmon favorite, so we don't want to talk too negatively, about Matt's guy.
For me, usually a team would not do a 2-year, $20 million contract on a guy they're going to waste unless it's the Jaguars. But the wide receiver 2 in Carolina last year, Curtis Samuel, got 105 targets.
Wow.
So it does beg the question, if whoever's the wide receiver 2, whether we don't know that yet, I think both of them are steals at their current ADP because of the ceiling of 105 targets.
There's some upside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't even know if we can safely say one's wide receiver 2 and one's wide receiver 3, just because of the base offense that they're going to run. It's going to be more, like the wide receiver Y and the wide receiver Z, as opposed to a numerical value and who's second or third in the depth chart. So, because I really do think they're going to be used interchanged, maybe not necessarily as far as formations are concerned, but as far as usage, I think they're going to see similar involvement.
Yeah, my thought about Robbie Anderson is this: if Kenny Stills can be fantasy viable on however many teams, Robbie Anderson can too. And I'm a Stills fan only in that similar skill set. The one thing Stills does, though, is he runs a lot out of the slot, and which gives him a little – and I don't know if Anderson will be pegged outside.
Yeah, and also, too, you mentioned his 2-year, $20 million contract. If I remember, he was one of the later receivers to get signed, right? So Carolina knew they wanted to add somebody. Rule says, hey, I know this guy. His agent says, okay, if you want him, here's his price. Okay, we'll do it because we have the money. I think that's kind of along the lines of what transpired there. And it was late in the free agency period. So, but I get your point. If you're paying someone, yeah, you want to play him. But in this case, it could just be a case of, where the market was, what they needed, and that was what they had to pay to get him.
And filling in the holes. It's hard for me to imagine that he got so much more than Emmanuel Sanders.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that because I've always liked Emmanuel Sanders, except in the Super Bowl when he did that fake fair catch on the punt return and, wound up driving the Broncos down the field for like what? I don't know.
61 yards, and that was Jordan Norwood.
Yeah, that was nuts. That was crazy. So, yeah. Other than that, I really like Emmanuel Sanders.
Yeah, for some reason, the Bronco lover in our family had no problem with that. All right, yeah. Last question, and we'll wrap up. Ian Thomas. Yeah. He's being drafted somewhere in the tight end 2 range, even later in the tight end 2 range, where you have similar names to Chris Herndon, Blake Jarwin, those kind of guys. Even Gronkowski's in that range. You like Ian Thomas?
I don't think I like Ian Thomas over those other guys that you mentioned, but that's the range where you want to get him, right? Because that's kind of like the unknown tight ends. You're kind of hoping that one of them hits. And if you're going to draft a tight end like your tight end 2, or maybe even your tight end 3, there's not a whole lot of risk involved, but the upside is pretty good. Now, could Ian Thomas be a difference maker on the offense? No, I don't think so. You got McCaffrey, you got DJ Moore already. The tight ends that do well are the ones that wind up, taking over the offense. Look at Darren Waller last year,
right? With
the Raiders, led the team in receptions. You tend to see that from these tight ends who come out of nowhere. George Kittle, not necessarily last year, but the year before, kind of came out of nowhere. He was a tight end 22 in the preseason, and he turns into Superman at the tight end position thanks to Kyle Shanahan and his offense, and of course Kittle and his just versatility as a blocker, as a receiver, as a do-all-everything guy. So I don't think Ian Thomas is that guy. If anyone, maybe Chris Herndon,
right,
could be someone who could really kind of make a difference. Otherwise, I think at best we're looking at 45 catches and 4 to 5 touchdowns for Thomas, and that's going to get you waiver wire. That's going to get you, I hope he does well kind of start. You don't really get your elite type of tight ends or your top 10 tight ends from production like that. And I just don't see him being a contributor in that offense to the point where he's going to be a productive option as far as fantasy. So I'm kind of staying away from Ian Thomas. And would rather approach someone like you mentioned, Herndon, Gronkowski, Blake Jarwin is interesting. And there's others too that I can't think of right now. Irv Smith, love Irv Smith this year. I think he could be big.
I'm a Jarwin guy, man. Witten was tight end 11 last year, and he's gone. And for the same reason I like Jarwin, I don't like Waller. I mean, I was going to say Oakland. Vegas didn't sign Witten to come be a coach on the field. And, if he takes –
But Waller led the team in receptions. That's not going to go away.
Right.
That won't go away.
It might not, but it might be reduced. But to your point, I did a study a few years ago. What happens, those of you that don't know, us in the fantasy community, we all have our pet studies that we did X years ago. And one of mine was fantasy football tight ends. And I found that the high percentage, 90-something% of fantasy tight ends that were elite, top 6, were because they were the top option on their team or they were in a high volume offense.
Like Higbee in the Rams last year.
Yeah, but you could even say Kelsey he's second behind Tyreek Hill. You could say, what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
even if they're not the number 1, they're in a high volume offense. You know, Andrews is the top receiver in Baltimore. I'm trying to run through the ones in my
Jared Cook in New Orleans.
Yep.
I mean, he had a lot of touchdowns. What do you have? 9 touchdowns last year, which is, you know, higher than normal for the team of the Saints, but also for him. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's guys who are going to be a big piece of the offense rather than a complementary type of addition.
Or it's got to be a big pie. What do you have to say about this, Rhys?
Olsen was on pace for 93 targets last year, and now he's gone. So maybe Ian Thomas might take over for.
But Olsen was also a big leader on the offense, and he was thrown to and he had targets because, you know, he kind of orchestrated in a lot of ways the huddle and the offense, and you know, he was a big piece of that. And so if you're an important player, you're going to get the ball. If you're not so important, regardless of the offense, you're probably not going to get the ball. So that I don't think you can translate Olsen to Thomas based on volume, because a lot of it has to do with Olsen's longevity and just his pedigree.
Yeah. And he knew he played a lot because he knew the offense well. That's why he's already locked up to be an announcer and analyst. So Jeff Haseley, thank you for joining us. So those of you looking for him on Twitter, Jeff, Jeff, I know that's easy name for me to remember. Haseley, Haseley. And Rhys, thank you. Closing remarks, either one of you guys?
Yeah, when's Rhys going to be on Twitter?
Well, he's 14. We can't really – he has
Come on.
He's 14, so we got to, like, moderate that a little bit. And so I do think he would eat up Twitter, but Twitter makes him up a little bit too much too. You know, there's stuff you and I see that I go –
Rhys, you can handle it, Rhys. You can handle it. It's not that bad.
Jump into the deep end, young man. Jump in.
It all depends on who you're following. Obviously, if you're following the wrong people, you could potentially, you know, get into a situation where it's not advantageous to you. But, you know, that could be sort of controlled. But anyway, looking forward to having you jump into Twitter. So getting back to last, what were you saying? Parting thoughts. I mean, this is a strange year. A strange year for fantasy too, because without a preseason, now it's no preseason. There's going to be less knowledge of certain players that are standing out in practice. There's going to be less awareness in the fantasy community of who's who and what certain players are looking like. And so there's going to be a lot of interesting back and forth banter on, you know, is Ronald Jones the guy, or are we talking Keyshawn Vaughn? You know, we're talking the Buccaneers backfield, the Philadelphia backfield, you know, all kinds of different areas. How much is Clyde Edwards-Helaire going to be used? I mean, there's a lot of questions that we may not know the answers to until week 1, 2, 3 even, where we kind of had an idea beforehand with preseason. You know, we'd see a player I think Chris Johnson did this one year. Remember, Jeff, on preseason, he just went off and was like, "Oh my God, who is this guy?" Right? And you know, we won't have that in the preseason. So there could be some surprises, and it's going to be important to follow certain people, beat writers and such, who are going to try to give us as much information as they can, and we got to, you know, soak that up as much as we can. So it's a slightly different fantasy year. That I think the ones who are deep into it and involved, those are going to be the ones who benefit the most. And you know, that's kind of how us at Football Guys, we kind of portray that in our articles, convey that, not necessarily portray, is what's going to be important. So my parting thought is it's just a lot different this year, and it's going to be fun, I think.
Plus the opt-out is on August 1st, and I would encourage anybody that's drafting between now and August 1st, just go read as many articles you can about who may opt out, because that's a big deal. If you waste a first-round pick on a player that's going to opt out, that's a big yikes. Second of all, you mentioned the guys that blow up in preseason.
Yeah.
It works the other way. You remember all the Jeff Janis hype and but even on the positive side, Victor Cruz broke out one preseason gets hurt, he gets stashed on IR, and then we see him the next year. So there's a lot of play in there for the people who know what's going on. Rhys, you have any closing thoughts for us?
I think that the Panthers will do better, especially with Joe Brady. But I also think what Jeff Haseley was saying about those who do the research the most will get better results in fantasy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of because the beat writers have already been told, we're not going to let you, the teams aren't going to tip their hand on formations. We don't have preseason to know this. We don't know. So like, here's a conundrum, Jeff, and I don't mean to leave in a hanging chat here on this, but you think about the Packers. Are they going to be run heavy, or are they going to go back to throwing it? What's A.J. Dillon's role going to be along with Aaron Jones? And I just mean there's a lot of those.
And don't forget Jamal Williams.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what's Carlos Hyde's role and Chris Carson going to look like in Seattle? There's a lot going on in
San Francisco with Deebo Samuel kind of up in the air. There's an absolute lot going on.
Yeah, I will say I'm on record thinking Samuel's not going to be healthy until November. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
People are saying early October. We've seen those injuries many times before, and there's usually some kind of hiccup or something that goes on, and it's hard to always I'm an optimist. I'm a big optimist, but it's hard to assume optimism on foot injuries.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you, Jeff, for joining us, and thank you, Rhys, and look for more podcasts from us, and we'll have Jeff on soon enough. Thank you, Jeff. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, and good luck with the podcast. And Rhys, we'll see you on Twitter.
Thank you.